welcome today to True View, where we bring the small group to the small screen. You're with us today with co-host Jamie Shaver, and I'm Julie Van Gorp, and today we have with us Sue and Angie and Mickey, and we're so delighted that they're here. They are all wives, and they are all women, just like Jamie and I, who are ordinary women who serve an extraordinary God, who want to bring glory to Him because He's transformed our lives. So we're just, again, hoping that as you join us today, you are going to learn some tips, not just on how to affair-proof your marriage, but also how really to keep your marriage alive and be in a place where your marriage is so awesome that you are living the joyous marriage that God intended for this institution.
And we all can agree, I'm sure, that marriages are under attack. Christian marriages are absolutely no exception, and particularly the target of Satan, who wants to destroy the family, which is that awesome unit that God's created to be a reflection of His wholeness. His strategy, we know Satan's strategy has always been to divide and conquer, and one of the ways he seeks to do that is to plant the idea in someone's mind that maybe somebody else is going to be a better fit for you than your current spouse is.
Well, and I think, again, we can look, and besides when we talk to people and realize not everyone we know, unfortunately, is in a marriage that is just meeting all their expectations, the divorce rate alone, those statistics certainly verify that there are a lot of unhappy, and unfortunately, you know, some studies at least say they're almost as high in Christian marriages, and that's at about a 53% of the marriages in America right now are ending in divorce. And we look and say, that is obviously grievous to God, and it's grievous to God because He loves us and He wants what's best to us. And when you bring two flesh together as one, He never wants them to be put asunder. But when we look at it statistically, which is really alarming because everyone tends to think, or not everyone, a lot of people think, oh, it's always the man having an affair. And according to statistics, about 57% of men have admitted that they have been unfaithful to their spouses. But an alarming 54% of women have also been unfaithful. And that's kind of an increasing number that we're seeing. What we want to underscore is we get to the point when we think affair, we're immediately thinking, okay, that's what's going on in the bedroom. But I think what we realize is affair always starts first in the mind, doesn't it, Jamie?
Yeah, it never starts in the bedroom. I mean, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. You know, Proverbs 23:7 tells that with us, and we know that that's true. It's minding what are those thoughts, and we need to guard our hearts because that's where everything is flowing from. So our thoughts are going to impact our heart attitude towards things, and those are all things that we need to just remember. And so I want to just say, you know, what are some ways that you think that you can protect your marriage from an affair? Do you guys have any ideas on that?
I think that if you would get more involved in their work and what they do at work, and praise them on a good job, don't leave room for somebody else to praise them when they do a good job, and just be there for them when they get home and greet them with a smile. And I know it's kind of hard sometimes with your family and your children. It's to greet your husband after a long day, but just get involved in his day.
You mean, Sue, when he walks in the door and you just kind of ignore him and act like, oh, who are you walking in the door? It's like, you don't think that's going to make him feel like, yeah, I want to come home to this.
Right, exactly.
Oh, yeah, I think you got to ask yourself, would I even want to live with me?
Yeah. You know, I'm nagging, he's coming in, and, you know, the whole house is disheveled, and it's like going, what are you doing here? It's one more thing for me to take care of. But I think you've hit on something there that's very important, Sue, of just making your husband feel that he's special and affirmed. So, is that something, Mickey and Angie, that you also would agree is an important thing? And
yes, absolutely. I think that just trying, you know, at the risk of sounding like the 1950s housewife, but just trying to make it a peaceful environment whenever they do come home, which realistically, that's not going to happen every day. We have our tough days with the kids, especially if you still have young children at home, or over the summer when all the kids are kind of going stir crazy, but make it peaceful and just a welcoming place to be, and make it matter when they come home. Even if it's just a quick hello, a quick kiss, and then you're back to making dinner or doing whatever busy thing you're doing as a mom. And I think keeping your marriage, having realistic expectations on what marriage is. You go back to that scripture you said about guarding your heart, and every sin, not just an affair, but every sin begins in our minds with thoughts.
Yeah.
So we need to guard our hearts and be careful about what we are exposing ourselves to. What are we watching? What are we reading? What are we listening to other women talk about? And just not even opening up that door to get us thinking in the area. It's temptation. Making sure that we don't set ourselves up for that temptation.
You know, Angie, as you say that, one of the things that I'm reminded of is that the Twilight series is out. I've never read it, but I know that, you know, the character who, it's hard for me to believe, is I think a werewolf that everybody finds really attractive. Like, okay, wow, he sucks your blood, or, you know, somebody. But I literally heard that there were people that said that were writing, or from Facebook, like they were dreaming that this person was so perfect that their expectation, and they were so disappointed with their marriages because they didn't measure up to this fictional character, and we're beginning to say
a bloodsucker.
Exactly. You know, wow. Sounds really positive, but you know, when we're saying that, but I think, you know, even for me, I can attest that reading romance novels when I was a young girl, you know, was planting seeds of this is what marriage is going to be like. And so, you know, for girls in particular, that it can start even of affair proofing from a young age.
Absolutely.
Of helping our children not to be putting into their mind something that is going to set up that unrealistic expectation.
And I think women too are so much more likely to become they can have an
Yes.
emotional affair. And I think that's what, when you're even talking about the romance novels, some of them can be so graphic, or, you know, that you're having this emotional affair outside of your real life spouse. And that I believe that can happen on things like social media sites, using Facebook inappropriately, or just being not wise about reaching out to somebody that you really have no business starting a conversation with, you know. So I would agree, definitely.
In fact, Jamie, as you say that, and maybe you all know, I'm aware of some people who have had affairs based on reconnecting with past boyfriends on Facebook. Do any of you know of any of those situations as well? You know, again, what's so harmful in this? I'm just reconnecting. You know, I always liked that person, or they were an important person in my life, or just want to know what they're doing. But that opening that door
Go back to the what ifs.
Exactly. That's right.
Well, and the scripture tells us that, you know, pride comes before a fall. And so I often think we can get into a trap in thinking, well, my marriage is awesome. I would never cheat on my spouse. And therefore, you allow yourself to participate in an activity that's actually a setup. And you don't even recognize that it is, because that prideful, arrogant spirit that can come sometimes to think, oh, I would never do that. I would never find myself there. And yet, I would say most people, if you ask them who've had affairs, would come back and say, "Why didn't I don't know how this happened." You know, it was that progression of
That's
just
right.
not being wise and creating that, having that prevention. You know.
Well, and I think that so much of it is, Jamie, where we can look and say, you know, especially in businesses, and Mickey, I know that you work outside the home, and it can be that place when you are interfacing, or, you know, again, with a lot of our husbands who are necessarily working with women in the workplace, and to have some guidelines. Are there any that you think might be important that either you've set, for example, Mickey, or that you know of people who've set, if they're working or their husband is working in a place where they need to do that, that might be some things that could help prevent that?
Well, in my case, if there's something like a business dinner or something like that, trying to make sure that I'm not isolated with another male is critical. Try to make sure there's another person there. Just set up that boundary so that that line can't be crossed.
Yes.
You know.
And is that something you and your husband decided together, that you were like, we're going to have you ever had a conversation, you and your husband, to say, let's make these kind of the boundaries for our marriage?
No, we really haven't had that conversation.
Okay.
No.
So that's something that you've just known intuitively. I mean, the Spirit's leading you there.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
And I know, Sue, you work outside the home.
I do. Pretty much the same there. Lunch, if we go out for lunch, we don't go out with a coworker of the opposite sex. You just don't do that. You go with the girls. You just don't leave any room. You know, stay professional all the time. Even with customers that are a little too friendly, you just have to stay professional all the time. they want to flirt and you want to play flirty back, but they can lead into the wrong idea, or they may, it's not acceptable. Just keep a professional attitude. And
Well, and that's such wisdom, and it can really be hard, especially if your spouse at the time is not satisfying what you consider to be your needs. It can be, and again, we know that the enemy of our souls is very seductive. He's going to know exactly, just that snake is still about, working to kind of slither into that relationship, and that can be. And you might think, what's the big deal if I'm flirting with someone at work? There's no harm in that.
There is.
But it plants those seeds of somebody else might be understanding me, or that woman that I'm working with, she always looks great, and when I come home, my wife is looking kind of dumpy, or she's in her sweats and her t-shirt all day, and I was just with this perfectly coiffed.
Well, that goes back to greeting your husband when he comes home. Try to fix yourself up a little bit. Make yourself. A lot of women tend to let themselves go, and I think if you take care of yourself, make the time to look good for him. I think that would also help with him wanting to look elsewhere.
Well, and it's funny, Sue, as you say that, and Angie, you'd mentioned about the woman of the 50s, and since I was born in that era,
High heels in the kitchen.
I can talk a little bit about it. But, we kind of make fun of that and go, oh, at the risk of sounding like that. But guess what? The divorce rate wasn't what it is now. The affairs weren't going on like they are now. What's, kind of like going, maybe they were onto something that really did make a difference, and I think something else that can make a big difference is even in our culture, we seem so much more focused on schlepping our kids everywhere or doing everything. How do you think that impacts a marriage, and how could that even relate to affair-proofing your marriage?
Oh, easily. I mean, God laid it out pretty straight for us in the Bible. He said your priorities are God, your spouse, then your family. And I think we spend a lot of time letting our kids get in the way.
Yes.
I think we're running our kids to sports and activities and music lessons, and we want them to be so well-rounded so they can get in a great college, so we load up their schedule with all these activities. But sitting and watching your kids at a soccer game or a softball game, that's not family time.
You're right.
It's wasted time.
It is.
And I think you've got to keep in mind that priority, that your husband is number one.
What are some ways that we can show that in our houses?
Well, I think, one aspect, you can start to feel guilty. Like, why, I'm hiring my kids out, I'm hiring someone to come in, take care of my kids for a baby, just so I need a night out. Why do I need a night out? So depending on your personality, you can start to feel guilty about it. But it is 100% necessary to still learn how to play with your husband, to still have fun. Find something that you both enjoy, and it doesn't have to be, skydiving or something so ridiculously exciting, but just something just to get out and reconnect and just date.
I think, Angie, that is one of the most important things. Making time every day, even if it's 5 minutes before you go to bed, where you make sure, even if you've had the busiest days, that you're reconnecting on that individually. But I think one of the best advices that we can give to marriage is to keep that spark alive. And if you're satisfied, you're not going to be looking elsewhere. Date your husband. Keep that romance.
Hold hands.
Yes.
When you go to the grocery store, hold hands.
That's right.
Childcare is often an issue. I think it's great to find another couple, and your date night can be Friday night, their date night can be Saturday night, and you can just swap kids. There's guilt-free because it's a 50-50 give and take situation.
Great idea.
It is a good idea.
And along that same lines, Angie, I think, and I am so grateful, I've been married now 34 years. We just celebrated, which I'm only by God's grace, has my husband endured living with me. But when I look at that, I am so grateful that one of the pieces of advice that we heard early on in our marriage was the importance of having a getaway at least one time a year. And I think people go, oh, there's no way I can afford that. And I just want to emphasize, it doesn't have to be exotic, but it needs to be private. Exactly. It just needs to give you that one-on-one privacy, because it's like to remind yourself, this is the reason we got married. It wasn't to just have kids and to establish that. And where he is reassured, he's number one in your life, like you said, Mickey, but you're reassured, I'm number one in his life, apart from God, obviously. But I think that is such an important thing. But your suggestion even where people say, well, I can't afford to go someplace, much less the child care, you can swap off for those weekends. It doesn't have to be a whole week. It might be just an overnight at minimum.
true.
But you could be doing those things. And I think that's where we go. We make a priority for cable TV or for our cell phones.
we do.
But what is the thing that is the most important thing that we need to say, I can sacrifice. I'll go and eat peanut butter for the next month if it means I'm going to be able to spend that time, right?
Yes.
Definitely. And I think it's important too that in my case, when my kids were younger yet, the kids are really good at throwing a guilt trip on you too. I don't want you to go, Mom. We need you here. Don't leave us with, you know, whoever it is. They never fought about grandma.
But not everyone has that opportunity to have a grandma
Right,
nearby.
exactly. So whoever was there and, you know, and helping you out while you could get away, it didn't really matter. The kids are still in there, you know, pulling at your leg as you're going out the door.
Yeah.
You know, don't let it stop you.
Well, that's
You've
also
gotta
such an
take that
awesome
time.
teaching moment for your children to say, we love you, but God has told us that this marriage is important and we're doing this because of our love for you. And I often find that when we get married, we say I do to that spouse, and it's not I do until we have kids or I do unless this. And so often we can have those, when those priorities are shifted, then we allow the child to win, and immediately the husband feels disrespected, which I think is such a problem. Men need to be respected and have that sense that they are in their homes.
I think one of the biggest mistakes that women make is lumping their husband in with their children. I don't know how many times I've heard that, just, you know, oh, I don't have 3 children, I have 4 children.
Right.
And lumping him, and their children hear them say that.
Right.
And the man loses his position of respect and authority over the home. And I think the words that we say have a huge impact. And
they reveal a lot too, Angie, about what we really feel. You know, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that to your children, you're obviously leaking that when you're with your husband. I mean, he's getting that feeling too of you're just like another child. And, you know, I think there again, what is so hard is we get married to someone, and when we are saying I do, we're all gushy-eyed and we're looking at him like, oh my gosh, you're the greatest thing in the world. And almost from the I do, especially we women, I think have a tendency to go, okay, I want you changing here, 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 and here. And where he's like, wait a minute, what happened to I love you and you're the greatest thing in the world. But as soon as I get to
Love you better.
once you get cleaned up in these areas, and it's that reality of, you know, praise God, Jesus loved us while we were yet sinners, you know, and died for us. And it's not like, but that what you were saying too, Sue, about coming home, we often, I will say, I often, at least earlier in my marriage, when we, in our first 14 years, we're not nearly what they've been the last 20, because I've learned a few things over the years, but that nagging wife, you know, and I think unfortunately, in what you were saying, Angie, have you all seen that where either it's easy for you to fall into that trap, or maybe you have some girlfriends that have, you kind of look and go, oh wow, if I were that husband, or let's reverse it. It might be where the husband's nagging on the wife. I don't want to say it's always that. We just, you know, and Proverbs kind of indicates that it's often that nagging wife that's making
chases them to the
rather
rooftop.
down the corner of the roof, you know. But talk about that a little bit, about how you see nagging could be a
Yeah.
destructive factor in a marriage.
Yeah, I feel sometimes I hear myself, I'm like, oh, you know, I feel like I am that nagging wife, and there's so many things you want to try to cover, you know, and you just have to stop and give them a minute and, you know, catch up. I hear myself, I know, I've been there, and I don't like to be nagged, so.
That's so important, Sue,
Sounds
isn't
right, he
it?
doesn't like to be nagged.
I read something once that said, don't pout and punish, which earlier in my marriage, that was definitely something that I did when my husband would do something that I didn't approve of. Then I would pout and punish him. Well, you didn't behave the way I wanted you to behave, so this is your punishment.
Right.
And it was so enlightening to read that. Don't pout and punish, love them anyhow, treat them the same way no matter how their behavior is, because like you just pointed out, I certainly misbehave in a way that's not always endearing to my husband. So
So often I think that pout and punish, women use sex as the punishment.
Yes.
And just say, forget that, I'm not doing that. Or if you do this, then I'm going to do this. Well, guess what? That is not for us to just be the decision on. You know, and Scripture tells us that the man is the head of the home.
Yeah.
And to just use that as punishment is going
Leverage.
to really, that will not affair-proof your marriage, because marriages, we are told not to stop coming together in that way unless it is for prayer. So, and yet so many women stop that for a multitude of reasons, but certainly to punish. I've also heard women say, well, I don't want to because, you know, I've just gained weight from having kids and I just don't feel good about myself. Then fix that. Do what you need to do to feel good about yourself, because that is so critical to a marriage. And if you think that you can just withhold it and it's not going to cause temptation and problems in your marriage, you are mistaken. You know, that is a absolute red flag. And I would even go so far to say, if there's any area in your marriage where you're feeling that you don't have unity with your spouse, look hard there, because that is where you're going to find the enemy. Wherever there's a little crack, I feel like the enemy just comes in with a giant pick and starts pounding that crack until in some cases there will be a gap so big that you might look and feel like you don't even know that person, and that love you had grew cold.
Yeah.
And now there's a chasm between the two of you. So I just so say, if there's anywhere, whether it's in your finances, in your, you know, relationship with, you know, how often you're having sex with one another, if it's the rearing of your children, any area that you see cracks or where there is not unity, look closer and resolve that issue.
And I think along that line, Jamie, it can just be so important. I think we'd all agree that there is open communication. I know you'd asked, you know, Mickey earlier, was that a guideline you'd established? And she was like, no. And not to say there's anything wrong with that, but I think it is important to say, you know what, these are things that we have agreed upon together. For example, I'm making this commitment before you that I'm not going to go out with a person of the opposite sex, or I am not going to, get on Facebook and look at past relationships. But things that you might establish as far as that as a group, but it also is communicating and saying, you know what, because it goes back to expectations. It's not so much how often are you having sexual relations, for example. Because for one couple, once a week might be where they go, that is what we've agreed, where for another couple, if it's not 5 times a week, there's going to be a disappointment. So it's more talking about that, so you can say, what's your expectation? And one of the things that my husband and I had heard, and I have to say, when we were going to a great Christian marriage counselor, and it helped us a lot, was to take the temperature in your marriage. And on a weekly basis, to kind of just say, hey, on a 1 to 10, how am I doing? And that really helped a lot. Because
no, it was not on a 1 to 10. Let me tell you how you're doing.
Very important. Although there were times, Jamie, I wanted to say that maybe. But, I think that's where we begin to go. Because you might think, hey, I'm at a 10 here. And your husband goes away and goes, oh, you're kind of at a 3. And if you're going into it truly wanting your marriage to be the best and you're not getting defensive, it can be such a great learning experience. And it's wonderful, of course, to set that up and to be able to say, okay, how can I help you to get it to that? And then openly say, okay, this is where I am. These are some things. Mickey, you'd said, for example, that earlier when we were talking that you like the counters to be clean.
Yes.
I like to go to bed. But what happens for a lot of people is we have issues like that are tiny things, small things. They start to loom large. Why? Because we've never shared them. And you begin to say it's those small foxes again that destroy the vineyard.
It's all that you're focusing on. And we all know that what you focus on is going to expand. So if you continue to make a choice, and we do have that choice, to focus on what's not happening versus focusing on the fact that the counters might be cluttered, but he did sweep the floor, or he came home and gave you a hug, and choose to
my
focus
case,
on
my husband will
those.
cook dinner. So that goes way over keeping the counters cleaned off. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, it does come into just good communication. It comes down to that. You need to communicate. If you don't have good communication, then the affair that leaves place for that. I mean, you got to talk. You got to talk it through.
And I think that's, you know, Sue, too, on that. It's how you communicate that's so important. A lot of times people go, I do communicate. I communicate with him all the time. He's just not listening. And I think that's where you have to go.
Exactly.
You know, are you sitting down, just like with your children? Do they hear you when you're yelling at them? You may feel a lot better. You may feel better after you've
But did they
given
even
your
get it,
husband
right?
usually as soon, at least if he's like mine, as soon as you go, that it's blah, 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 blah. You know, with it, that communication
Yeah.
needs to be in a non-emotional, non-angry, matter of fact, honey, and where you're able to communicate in that. It's because I love you and because I love our marriage and I want what's best for us, that I want to make you aware that when you leave those counters, I go to bed and I'm a little irritated. Is there something we can do? And it might be where you got to go, you know what, Lord? The Lord may speak to you and say, get over it.
Get over it. I know
You
that's
know,
what
there
I
are
was gonna say.
times when it's like,
Yep.
focus on the positive, don't let that little thing, and there might be some bigger things where you go, okay, how do we work together? So with that, you know, because not everybody has a perfect marriage. Anybody here with a perfect marriage? Maybe close. Well, I can tell you this. Every marriage, I think, has its ups and its lows, and you know, it's like everything else in life. But what is the role of prayer in a marriage, do you think?
Praying together, I think, can bring you close together on that spiritual level, on the most important level. But even if maybe you're in a situation where you're on two different schedules, or your husband isn't at the same spiritual level that you're at, and he doesn't really feel comfortable praying with you, pray for him.
Yeah.
So important.
Pray for the marriage, pray for him. Pray for God's protection, His anointing, His blessing, for wisdom, discernment regarding our marriage, because it is the most important relationship outside of a relationship with God. It's worth a prayer.
It, without a doubt, AJ. Well said. Mickey, anything you want to add
Reading
about
the Bible
that?
together. Yeah, if you
Excellent.
do have a spouse that's open to that, that's following along a walk with Christ, is reading a Bible together, even if you're just going through a chapter and not necessarily leaving much time for discussion, but just read it together.
How about you, Sue?
Yeah, there's times when we're busy and we can't do that together, so throughout the day we'll text or email, and then we'll share later the prayer that we both shared that day. You know, it's getting it in, you know, it's so important. Yeah.
And I think what you're saying there too, you may not every day be able to have that prayer time, either alone or, you know, together. I think so much of it, though, is at that place of going, when you desire the best, you're going to say, Lord, even if my husband isn't one who will be in the Word or isn't one, and a lot of women have that issue of saying they aren't there. You can pray, Lord, give me your love for him. Give me
Yes.
your discernment. Give me your heart. I prayed for mountain-moving love for my spouse, and God was faithful to give it to me. And I think, again, we're the Word of God. Thy word have I hidden in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Get in the Word, and God will give you the power to have that kind of marriage that He designed you to have. He'll empower you to have it. So we just appreciate you again joining us here on True View. We will have a list of suggestions on our website about how to have the best marriage possible, God's way.
The American Legion honors our newest generation of warriors and veterans. Please join us in supporting and recognizing their unique contributions and needs. Go to legion.org/honor-veterans to find out more.
Once you figure out how to speak your kids' language, well, you don't really have to say much at all. From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.